Okay, in this demo, we're going to cover some basic design strategies along with image making techniques. The first thing you want to do is start off by opening your high-res wireframe in Illustrator. And we're going to be mostly working with our hero image here. So the majority of you have some sort of hero image or larger image on your main homepage. So today we're going to really key in on working with that image and creating that image. So the first thing we need to find out is what that overall size of that image is. So in Illustrator, all we have to do is click on the block, and then if you click the transform tool, it'll tell you the pixel width and height for your image. So mine is pretty much 1280, it's probably extending a tiny bit there, by 786. So you want to write down your overall hero image size before we start to work in Photoshop. So we're going to jump over to Photoshop. And the end image we're going to be creating at the beginning of this demo will look something like this. I'm just going to walk through how I created this image to give you an idea of some of the basics you need to know before we get into advanced techniques. So again, the first thing you want to do is create that template. So it was 1280 by 786. And you can work with 72 dpi because we're working for screen. So again, for on the phone or for on the desktop, you can work at 72. If you'd like to do it more high res, if you're working on an iPad, sometimes you can work at 150. It just really depends on the images that you've downloaded. So one of the big things I wanted to cover before we get into doing any of the layout is simply this. In my images folder, you can see that I have probably 40 images to work with. So if you don't have a lot of images downloaded to really compose with, you're going to really struggle with putting some interesting hero images together. So take a moment, stop working with the demo, and download about 50 images so you have a really good starting point of what you want to work with. A part of it too is the images that you select. So as I'm coming through here, I have a wide variety of images that I'm going to be working with, from historical to really new and modern records to actual album covers to record players themselves. So again, even patterns with different albums. So again, you want to have a wide variety for your subject matter to work with. So the first thing I want to cover is just kind of a refresher on working with cutting images out in Photoshop. This is one of the biggest things I want you to work with this next week. We want to be composing our own images, not just using one image, putting it in place, and that's it, and calling it a day. So we want to look at doing a layer mask, and most of you worked with that in 4D, but we're going to go over that one more time. So the image I'm going to work with to start off with is my LP image here. I'm just going to open that. And so if you want to cut out that image just within the open image, that's fine. Or you can open it and drag it into your layout that you're starting with. That choice is yours. I'm just going to work within the image itself. It's a little easier so you can see how to work with the layer mask. First thing I'm going to do is just double click and make it the actual image layer versus having a background. And then the second thing I'm going to do is put a layer below it and select a really bright color. Let's say I'm going to use a pink here. And to create a layer mask, it's really simple. You're just going to select the layer, go under layer, layer mask, reveal all. So there's a lot of ways to cut out this image, and if you know a couple of varieties, that's fine. I'm just going to show you the one way that I really know and that I've been using for quite a few years. So when you're on the layer mask, you don't want to be on the image itself. You want to make sure that you're on the layer mask. And you'll see that it turns to black and white in the corner here. And so there's a lot of ways to cut this image out, and I'm going to do it kind of quickly. What you can do is just select areas and hit Option Delete, which will fill with the foreground color. So again, I'm using the marquee and hitting Option Delete, and what that does is it will erase, so this becomes transparent. And the beauty of the layer mask is if I mess up, I can reselect an area and hit Command Delete, and it'll fill the background layer, and this will make it come back. So again, if I was to be cutting this out, made a mistake and said, oh my, I don't want to fill all that image, I cut it out wrong, I can just come back, reselect it, and fill it back in. So we can see that I have a record that's more circular, so I can actually start with the ellipse, and if I hold Option and Shift, I can expand it out to cut this image out. And if I hit Shift Command I, it'll select the area around the image. So again, if you make a selection, if I was to delete that or fill that, you see that I would actually knock out the image that I'm trying to cut out. So if I do Shift Command I, it makes a direct selection of everything around it, and then if I hit Option Delete, it will cut the record out for me. So right now you can see that I have a layer mask cutting everything out around the record, and I left purposely a halo here just to show you how you can cut out the record by hand. It's not ideal if you have a geometric shape, but I just want to go through this. If you hit the brush tool or just hit B, and you can see you have two options. If you hit the brush, you have where it has a slight gradient to it, which means it'll do a soft edge, versus if I have a hardness of 100, it'll do a very hard edge. So if we zoom way in, what you do is you hold Shift and you can click around the edge here, and this is how you would cut an image out that isn't geometric. And I'll go over another image that has more shapes to deal with, but as you can see, as I can kind of cut along the edge, and if I hit Control and click, I get the menu for the brushes. So again, I can sit and cut this out, and if I wanted a softer edge, I could click over here, and just to show you the difference, you can see how it kind of feathers versus a harder edge here. So that's kind of up to you as you're cutting the image out, what you think is appropriate. And again, you want to make sure you don't leave anything in the corners. So this is how you cut out an image. Again, layer masking, you can just take this and drag and drop it into your image. So here, if this is my image here, there's a lot of ways to do the image in drag and drop. So you can see we've got my cutout image in place here. Just going to put this back. An easier way to actually do this is if you duplicate the layer, you can actually target the document. So the one I'm working with right now is under Untitled 1. So again, if I hit Control, click the layer, and hit Duplicate Layer, I can do Untitled 1, which is my target composition. So you see I've duplicated that in. Okay, so I have both my images in. The first thing I want to do is just apply a background color. So I'm just going to double click the background, and then I'm going to fill it. So if I hit Option Delete, it'll fill the foreground color. If I hit Command Delete, it fills the background color. So I'm just going to work with this blue here. I'm going to select my image. If I hit Command T, that's transform, it'll allow me to scale. When you're scaling an image, you always want to make sure you're holding shift. This is the same in Illustrator. Allows you to scale it without losing the proportion or skewing the image itself. So again, I hit return. You can see that I have a hairline in my image, so it didn't quite cut it out perfectly. So again, make sure you're not on the image, on the layer mask. Make sure you have the black selected, and I'm just using the brush again. If I hit B, it brings the brush tool up, and this allows me to cut it out. Like I said, I didn't cut this out perfectly, but we'll make sure your images are when you're working with your final. So I can either cut this one out and do it again with the record here, or I can just simply duplicate it since we're using repetition as a key strategy in our design here. Just going to hold shift, drag it across, and line it up. So in our design that we're working with here, we repeated a background pattern. Now this is a little record doodle that I put together, and it's really easy to create your own patterns in Photoshop and then apply them. So all I did was I made a 40 by 40. So if you make a new document, work anywhere between 5 pixels to 40 pixels when you're creating a pattern. So I just did a new document that was 40 by 40. And I just filled it with the same background color. Now you can create a pattern with any color at all if you wanted it to be transparent over top of it. And so I did all my layers, just drew it in exactly the way I'd like. And then to create a pattern in Photoshop, all you do is you go down under Edit, Define Pattern, and it'll pop up where you can put a pattern name in. So I'm just going to call it Record Pattern and hit OK. Okay, so there's 2 ways we can apply our pattern. We can create a layer and fill that with the pattern, or we can apply it through a Photoshop effect. So I'm going to go over how to do it via layer first. So if you create a new layer, which is here, we'll just call it pattern, and you'll go under edit and you'll do fill, and under fill there's foreground, background, color, all these options. We just want to select pattern, and then you'll have custom pattern as an option, and I have quite a few made, but I just want to select the one I've just created, and I'm going to hit OK, and it'll apply your small illustration into a repeating pattern. So when you create this pattern, there's a lot of things you can kind of play around with to get the design of it to work right. First and foremost is you can push the opacity down, but also you can play around with multiply, lighten, and all the other layer effects that can be applied to any layer in Photoshop. The other way we can apply a pattern is through a layer effect. So I'll just turn this off, select my layer, and under effects here, I'm going to select pattern overlay. And once I select pattern overlay, you have the same options that you did with the layer in the layer effect. So again, I can control the overall opacity through the layer style, but the other thing I can't do with the other one is I can actually scale it down or scale it up. Now when you experiment with this, you just want to make sure that you don't scale it too large to where it may pixelate or become a little bit grainy. So again, just see what works best for you, but don't push it too far in case it pixelates the overall image. Again, the same options here with layer, overlay, screen, all that is part of the options. So I'm just going to hit OK. And that's how you apply your own created pattern in Photoshop. So to import into Illustrator, it's really easy. All I have to do is go under File, Place. I'm going to select my PSD file. Make sure you link it, because anytime you would update this file, it actually would update in Illustrator for you. So this is really important. Don't select it as a template or any of these other options. You're just going to hit place. I would click outside the image unless you want it to be masked inside of that. Hit OK. Align it. And now we've applied our first design.